The crystal chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Metropole Hotel dripped light like frozen diamonds, each facet catching the shimmer of silk gowns and the cold glint of expensive watches. Eleanor Vance felt the weight of it all, not just the physical weight of the 7-month swell beneath her velvet dress, but the oppressive weight of belonging to a world she had only married into. Her husband, Damien Vance, stood a few feet away, a titan in a tailored tuxedo. He wasn't speaking to her. He rarely did at these functions. He was a presence, a force of nature that people orbited, and she was his most beautiful, most precious satellite, kept in a perfect, silent trajectory. For months, a chilling unease had coiled in her gut, a feeling as persistent and unwelcome as the morning sickness of her first trimester. It was in the late-night calls he took on the balcony, his voice a low murmur that the wind stole before it could reach her. It was in the faint floral scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his suit jackets. It was in the way his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, would sometimes look straight through her, as if focused on a distant horizon she couldn't see. She told herself it was the hormones, the anxiety of impending motherhood. Damien was a billionaire, the CEO of Vance Industries, a global conglomerate with tendrils in every market. Of course he was busy. Of course he was distracted. Men like Damien didn't operate on the same plane as everyone else. They were celestial bodies, and sometimes their gravity was so immense it warped the reality of those closest to them. But the doubt was a splinter under her skin, festering. Tonight the splinter was digging deeper. A woman named Isabella Rossi had attached herself to Damien's side the moment they'd arrived. She was everything Eleanor was not, sharp, angular beauty, where Eleanor was soft, a laugh like breaking glass where Eleanor's was a quiet melody, a predatory confidence that made Eleanor's gentle nature feel like a weakness. Isabella was the lead architect on Damien's new skyscraper project, a fact she announced to anyone within earshot. But the way she touched his arm, the proprietary glance she shot Eleanor, spoke of a partnership that extended far beyond blueprints and steel beams. Eleanor watched them from across the room, a glass of sparkling water trembling in her hand. Damien's face was an unreadable mask of polite indifference, the same mask he wore in boardrooms and hostile negotiations. But Isabella was vibrant, alive, her hand lingering on his lapel, her crimson lips whispering something that made a muscle in his jaw tighten. A wave of dizziness washed over Eleanor. The air, thick with perfume and forced laughter, suddenly felt suffocating. The baby shifted, a hard, uncomfortable pressure against her ribs. She needed to leave. She made her way through the glittering crowd, murmuring apologies as she navigated the small islands of conversation. She reached Damien's side, placing a hand on his arm. "Damien," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not feeling well. I'd like to go home." Damien turned, his gaze finally settling on her. For a fleeting second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Concern, perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar, impenetrable calm. Before he could answer, Isabella let out a silvery, condescending laugh. "Oh, the little mother is tired," she cooed, her eyes sweeping over Eleanor's swollen belly with disdain. It must be so exhausting, carrying the heir to the Vance fortune. Such a heavy burden. Eleanor flinched, her hand instinctively moving to shield her stomach. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firmer now. "I was speaking to my husband." "Your husband?" Isabella's smile sharpened. She stepped closer, invading Eleanor's space, her expensive perfume a cloying assault. "Darling, Damien and I are discussing business, real business, the kind that builds empires, not the domestic kind." She looked pointedly at Eleanor's stomach again. "You should run along. The nanny can tuck you in." The public humiliation was a slap in the face. Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks. She looked at Damien, pleading with her eyes for him to intervene, to say something, to defend her. He remained silent, a statue carved from ice and indifference. His silence was her answer. It was the confirmation of every fear she had harbored for months. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. "I'm going home, Damien, with or without you." She turned to leave, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. The illusion of her perfect life, the gilded cage she had called home, was shattering around her. Not so fast. Isabella's voice was a steel whip. She grabbed Eleanor's arm, her fingers digging in like talons. Damien isn't done with me yet. Let go of me, Eleanor gasped, trying to pull away. You think this baby gives you a claim on him? Isabella hissed, her face contorted with a vicious fury that stole its beauty. It's a leash, nothing more. A pathetic little trap. He's only with you out of obligation. The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the gala faded into a dull roar. All Eleanor could see was the venom in Isabella's eyes. All she could feel was the desperate need to protect the innocent life inside her. She wrenched her arm free. You're insane, she breathed. Isabella's painted smile twisted into a snarl. And you're in my way. In a movement that was shockingly fast and brutal, Isabella drew back her leg, her stiletto-heeled shoe a glittering weapon, and kicked. The blow landed squarely on Eleanor's pregnant stomach. A starburst of agony exploded through her, so intense it stole her breath. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers who had frozen to watch the drama unfold. The world tilted, the diamond lights of the chandelier blurring into streaks as Eleanor buckled, her hands flying to cradle the source of the pain, a strangled cry escaping her lips. She stumbled backward, her legs giving way, bracing for the hard, unforgiving marble floor. Chaos erupted. The polite murmur of the gala shattered into a cacophony of shocked cries and frantic movement. People surged forward, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. But Eleanor saw none of it. Her entire universe had contracted to the searing pain in her abdomen and the terrifying liquid warmth she suddenly felt spreading down her leg. Fear, cold and absolute, eclipsed the pain. My baby was her only thought, a silent, desperate scream in her mind. She didn't hit the floor. Strong arms caught her, encircling her with a surprising gentleness. She looked up through a haze of tears and agony, expecting a concerned stranger, a hotel staff member. But the face she saw was Damien's. His expression was no longer indifferent. It was something else entirely, something she had never seen before. The mask had not just cracked, it had been obliterated. What lay beneath was a stillness so profound, so utterly devoid of emotion, it was more terrifying than any rage. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. He held her securely, his focus entirely on her. Breathe, Eleanor, he said, his voice low and steady, a strange anchor in the swirling storm of her panic. Just breathe. Isabella stood frozen a few feet away, her chest heaving, the triumphant fury on her face slowly being replaced by a flicker of uncertainty as she registered the gravity of her actions. The entire room was staring at her. She seemed to realize she had crossed a line, not just a social one, but something far more perilous. She took a hesitant step forward, forcing a shaky laugh. Damien, darling, she's being dramatic. I barely touched her. You know how these pregnant women are, so emotional. Damien didn't even look at her. He carefully helped Eleanor straighten, his hand never leaving the small of her back, a silent, unyielding support. He scanned Eleanor's face, his stormy eyes searching hers, and in their depths she saw that flicker again, clearer this time. It was a cold, calculating fire. Only when he was certain Eleanor was steady on her feet did he turn his head, a slow, deliberate movement. He looked at Isabella. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He simply looked at her, and the glacial calm in his eyes made the entire suddenly silent ballroom feel 20 degrees colder. Isabella faltered under his gaze. Damien, she whispered, her bravado crumbling into dust. Damien took one step toward her, closing the distance between them. He leaned in, his body shielding his words from the prying ears of the crowd. Eleanor was close enough to hear, to feel the chilling vibration of his voice. It was not a shout. It was a whisper, a sound more lethal than any explosion, a promise of absolute ruin delivered with the quiet finality of a death sentence. I was waiting for a reason to destroy you, Damien breathed, the words a wisp of Arctic air against Isabella's ear. You just gave it to me. Isabella's face went white, the blood draining from it so fast she looked like a porcelain doll. The meaning behind his words, the sheer, unadulterated threat, hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She understood, in that horrifying instant, that she had not just assaulted a rival, she had triggered a meticulously set trap laid by a master predator. Damien straightened up, his face once again an impassive mask, but now Eleanor understood. It wasn't a mask of indifference, it was a mask of control. He raised a single finger, and two of his personal security guards, men who seemed to materialize from the shadows, were instantly at his side. "Ms. Rossi is leaving," Damien stated, his voice carrying with quiet authority across the hushed room. "Ensure she is escorted off the premises, and see to it that her access to all Vance properties is permanently revoked, immediately." "Damien, you can't," Isabella shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "My father, our project, you need me." The guards took her arms. She struggled, her designer dress twisting, her face a mask of disbelief and panic. "Damien, tell them to let me go. You love me." Damien had already turned his back on her, his entire focus returning to Eleanor. He was oblivious to the scene, to the gasps and whispers, to the woman he had seemingly been having an affair with, being dragged away like common trash. He placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's cheek, his thumb stroking away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "We're going to the hospital," he said softly, his voice for her alone. "Dr. Evans is meeting us there. Everything is going to be all right, Eleanor, I promise you." He swept her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. As he carried her through the parted sea of stunned socialites, Eleanor buried her face in his shoulder. The world was a blur of flashing lights and muted sounds. The pain in her belly was a dull, persistent throb, but it was overshadowed by the deafening echo of his whisper. "I was waiting for a reason to destroy you." It wasn't the angry retort of a man defending his wife. It was the declaration of a war that had already been won. She had thought she was a pawn in a game of infidelity. She was beginning to realize she was standing at the center of a battlefield she never even knew existed. The sterile, white environment of the private hospital suite was a world away from the opulent chaos of the gala. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet efficiency. A fetal monitor was strapped to Eleanor's belly, its rhythmic, steady beat the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of her son's heart, strong and unwavering. Dr. Evans had assured them that the kick, while brutal, had been absorbed mostly by the amniotic fluid. The baby was safe. Eleanor was bruised and shaken, but she would be fine. She lay back against the propped-up pillows, watching Damien. He hadn't left her side. He stood by the window, his back to her, staring out at the sprawling city lights. The tuxedo jacket was gone. His sleeves were rolled up to his forearms, and his tie was loosened. He had been a silent, coiled spring of tension ever since they arrived, speaking only to the medical staff in clipped, precise tones. Now the silence between them was a chasm. The questions swirled in Eleanor's mind, a dizzying vortex of confusion and fear. His whisper to Isabella played on a loop, each word a piece of a puzzle she couldn't begin to solve. Finally, he turned from the window, and his face was raw, stripped of all its usual masks. He looked tired, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked vulnerable. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, firm, and achingly real. "Eleanor," he began, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name, "I know you have questions. And I know I have failed you in every conceivable way as a husband. My silence, my distance, it was inexcusable. But it was not what you think." Eleanor simply looked at him, waiting. She was too exhausted for accusations, too raw for anger. She just needed the truth. "There was no affair," he said, the words stark and clear in the quiet room. "I have never been, and will never be, unfaithful to you." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "Damien, I saw you. Tonight. For months. The way she touched you, the late nights. It was a performance," he cut her off, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "A long, dangerous, and necessary performance, and you, my love, were the one person I had to keep in the dark to ensure your safety." He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. "Isabella Rossi is not just an architect. She is the daughter of Marco Rossi." The name landed with a thud. Marco Rossi, the CEO of Rossi Corp, Vance Industries' most ruthless competitor. The two men were titans locked in a decade-long corporate war. Their rivalry was the stuff of financial legend. Marco has been trying to ruin me for years, Damien continued, his voice hardening, the cold fire returning to his eyes. Hostile takeovers, market manipulation, poaching my top executives. He's been a cancer. 6 months ago, our internal security flagged a major intelligence leak. Schematics for our new proprietary engine, confidential financial projections, details of a pending merger. Someone on the inside was feeding information directly to Rossi Corp. It was an act of corporate espionage that could have crippled us. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. We traced the leak. It was sophisticated, buried under layers of false credentials and ghost servers. But it all led back to one person, Isabella. Her father placed her in my company a year ago, playing the long game. She worked her way up, proved herself invaluable on the skyscraper project, and gained access to the highest levels of the company. She was his viper in our nest. Eleanor stared at him, her mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the deception. You knew. For how long? 4 months, he admitted, a flicker of self-loathing in his eyes. We confirmed it was her 4 months ago, but I couldn't just fire her. That would have been too easy. She was just the delivery system. I needed the source. I needed to destroy Marco. I needed to prove, irrefutably, that he was behind it all, and I needed to do it in a way that would leave him with nothing. No company, no reputation, no escape. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and brilliant. The late-night calls, the feigned closeness. The affair was bait. So I played his game, Damien said, his voice dropping to a low growl. I let her think she was seducing me, that she had me under her spell. I fed her information, carefully curated, misleading data that would lead her father to make a series of catastrophic business decisions. I let her believe she was winning, that she was pulling the wool over my eyes. Every shared drink, every late-night meeting, every touch she thought was a victory for her was a nail in her father's coffin. I was recording everything, audio, video, tracking her data transfers. I built a case against Marco Rossi so airtight, so utterly damning, that he will never recover. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. The man she married, the quiet, distant figure who she thought was neglecting her for another woman, was a grandmaster playing a lethal game of chess, and she hadn't even known the board existed. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered, the hurt still a raw wound. Damien, I thought I was losing you. I thought our marriage was a lie. His face contorted with genuine pain. Because Marco Rossi is not just a businessman, Eleanor. He's a monster. He has ties to criminal elements you can't even imagine. If he had the slightest suspicion that you knew that you were a part of my life in any way other than the neglected wife, he would have come after you. He would have used you to get to me. The baby... He choked on the word, his composure finally breaking. My God, Eleanor, the only way to keep you safe was to make you seem unimportant, to make our marriage look like it was already over. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Acting indifferent to you, seeing the pain in your eyes day after day. It was killing me, but your safety, and the safety of our child, was the only thing that mattered. He looked at her, his stormy eyes pleading for understanding. Tonight was supposed to be the end, the final act. All the evidence was compiled. My legal team was ready to strike tomorrow morning. I just needed to get through one more night of the charade. But she lost control. She saw you, the beautiful, pregnant wife, and her jealousy, her arrogance, it made her reckless. She broke the rules of the game. He reached out and gently touched her stomach, his hand splayed protectively over their son. When she kicked you, he said, his voice dropping to that same lethal whisper from the ballroom, she did more than attack my wife and my child. She gave me a public, undeniable moral justification for the annihilation I had already planned. She turned herself from a corporate spy into a villain in front of 200 of the city's most influential people. She handed me the narrative on a silver platter. Eleanor finally understood. The kick wasn't the cause of Isabella's downfall, it was merely the trigger. The gun had been loaded and aimed for months. Isabella had just foolishly, arrogantly pulled the trigger on herself. The whisper in the ballroom wasn't a spontaneous threat. It was the quiet announcement of a checkmate that had been planned 10 moves in advance. She looked at her husband, this brilliant, ruthless, terrifying man who had orchestrated a corporate demolition while pretending to have an affair, all to protect a family he seemed to be ignoring. The chasm between them was still there, but now, for the first time, she could see the bridge he had been building across it in secret all along. The following morning, the world woke up to a war. It wasn't a war of bombs and bullets, but of stock tickers and headlines, a brutal, bloodless corporate execution played out in the global theatre of finance. Damien, it turned out, had not been idle in the hours after leaving the hospital. While Eleanor slept, he had unleashed his storm. At 7 a.m. sharp, a fleet of black cars descended upon the gleaming headquarters of Rossi Corp. They weren't filled with executives for a merger, but with federal agents armed with warrants. Simultaneously, Damien's legal team filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit citing corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and racketeering. The evidence was released to the press in a meticulously organized digital dossier. There were audio recordings of Isabella boasting to her father about the information she was extracting from a love-struck Damien. There were encrypted emails detailing the transfer of Vance Industries' proprietary designs. There were financial records showing how Rossi Corp had used this stolen information to undercut Vance in key markets. The crown jewel was a high-definition video from a hidden camera in the conference room where Damien held his private meetings with Isabella. It showed her plugging a flash drive into his laptop, the triumphant smirk on her face a damning portrait of guilt. By 9:05 a.m., when the New York Stock Exchange opened, it was a bloodbath. Rossi Corp stock, RSCI, didn't just dip, it plummeted off a cliff. The ticker was a waterfall of red. Traders were screaming into phones, trying to offload shares that were becoming more worthless by the second. Eleanor watched it all unfold from the comfort of her hospital bed, a tablet in her lap. News channels had abandoned all other stories. This was the lead. "Vance unleashes hell on Rossi," screamed one headline. "The honeypot spy, Isabella Rossi arrested," declared another, accompanied by a humiliating photo of Isabella, her gala dress now rumpled and stained, being led from her penthouse in handcuffs. Her face was a mask of sheer, uncomprehending terror. The beautiful, sharp predator from the night before was gone, replaced by a frightened, broken girl who had been a pawn in a game far too big for her. Damien walked back into the room mid-morning, holding 2 cups of coffee. He had traded his suit for a simple grey cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked as if he'd just had a restful 8 hours of sleep, not as if he had just single-handedly dismantled a corporate empire. He handed her a cup and sat beside her. "It's done," he said simply. "I saw," Eleanor replied, gesturing to the tablet. "Damien, it's absolute." "It had to be," he said, his tone devoid of triumph, filled only with a grim finality. "A threat like Marco Rossi isn't deterred. It has to be eradicated. His board has already convened an emergency meeting to oust him. The federal investigation will freeze his assets. His reputation is gone. His company will be carved up and sold for parts by the end of the month. He has nothing left." Eleanor thought of Isabella, of the viciousness in her eyes the night before. She felt no pity, but a profound sense of awe at the calculated ruthlessness of her husband. "And what you fed them? The misleading information?" A rare, thin smile touched Damien's lips. "The engine schematics I let Isabella steal had a deliberate, catastrophic design flaw. Rossi Corp has already invested over $900 million tooling their factories to produce it. The pending merger I let slip was with a shell corporation set up by my own team. When Marco tried to sabotage it by making a rival offer, he ended up in a bidding war against himself, pouring billions of his liquid capital into a company that doesn't exist." Eleanor could only shake her head. He hadn't just defended himself, he had lured his enemy into a labyrinth of his own making, and then collapsed every wall. It was a masterpiece of strategic destruction. But the corporate victory felt distant, abstract. The personal victory, the safety of their child, was what resonated in the quiet hospital room. The steady thump-thump from the fetal monitor was the only stock ticker that mattered. The gala, Eleanor said softly. "The story about what Isabella did to me. It's everywhere." "I made sure of it," Damien said, his face hardening again. The security footage from the ballroom was leaked to a dozen media outlets an hour after she was arrested. No one is talking about a simple corporate rivalry anymore. They're talking about a monster who attacked a pregnant woman. I've taken the moral high ground. Marco Rossi isn't just a corporate thief. He's the father of a villain. Public opinion will bury him just as surely as the SEC will. He had weaponized everything, the affair, the theft, even the assault on his own wife. He had turned every move his enemies made against them, transforming their weapons into his own. Eleanor looked at this man, her husband, and felt a complex cocktail of emotions. Fear, respect, and a strange burgeoning sense of security. For months, she had felt like she was living in a fragile glass house. Now she realized she was living in a fortress, and its master had just obliterated the only army that dared approach its walls. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the bruise that was beginning to form on her cheek from where she'd stumbled. "This is my fault, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and filled with regret. "All of this. The fear you felt, the humiliation. I should have found another way." "Was there another way?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. He met her gaze, his own eyes honest and raw. "No," he admitted. "To guarantee your safety, to ensure he could never touch you, I had to let him think you meant nothing to me. It was the only way. But living that lie and forcing you to live in it, I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you." The destruction of the Rossi family was complete, but the reconstruction of the Vance family had only just begun. The fortress had proven impenetrable from the outside, but now they had to repair the cracks that had formed within. When Eleanor was discharged from the hospital 2 days later, she did not return to the life she had known. The cold, silent mansion felt different. The air of neglect and suspicion had been vaporized, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. Damien had cleared his schedule indefinitely. His phone, which had once been a constant, intrusive presence, now lay discarded on a side table, silent. The silence in the house was no longer empty, it was full of presence, of unspoken words waiting to be said. But trust, once shattered, is not so easily mended. The memory of her isolation, of the public humiliation, of her genuine belief that her marriage was over, was a ghost that haunted the opulent rooms of their home. Damien was patient, attentive, but Eleanor kept a part of herself protected, a wall around her heart she wasn't yet ready to lower. One afternoon, he found her in the library, staring blankly at a book she hadn't turned the page of in an hour. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he began, his voice hesitant. "Words are easy, but I need you to see the whole truth, not just my side of it." He led her to his home office, a room she had always considered his inner sanctum. He sat her down at his massive mahogany desk and turned on a widescreen monitor. He entered a password, and a complex security interface appeared. "I told you I was protecting you," he said softly. "This is how." He clicked a file. A grid of security camera feeds appeared. There were feeds from every corner of their property, but there were others she didn't recognize. A camera across the street from her favorite cafe. A discreet angle on the entrance to the prenatal yoga studio. A view of the parking garage at her doctor's office. "You had me followed?" she asked, a knot of ice forming in her stomach. It felt like a violation, another layer of his control. "I had you protected," he corrected gently. He opened another file, a detailed dossier on Marco Rossi, filled with information that went far beyond corporate dealings. It detailed his connections to organized crime, his history of intimidation, his ruthlessness. "These are the people I was afraid of," Damien said, his voice grim. "If Marco had any idea how much you truly mean to me, he would have sent one of them. Your unimportance was your armor, Eleanor. It was the only armor I could give you." She stared at the screen, at the proof of his secret war and his secret protection. The months of feeling alone were suddenly recast in a new, complicated light. She hadn't been alone. She had been under surveillance. "There's more," he said, taking a deep breath. The protection wasn't just cameras and men in cars, it was closer than that. Much closer. He picked up the intercom on his desk. "Amelia, could you come to the office, please?" Eleanor frowned. Amelia was her personal assistant, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 30s whom Damien had hired for her 6 months ago, right when the leaks had been discovered. Amelia was a godsend, efficient, kind, and a wonderful listener. Eleanor had confided in her, had cried on her shoulder more than once about Damien's distance. The door opened and Amelia walked in. She was dressed in her usual simple, elegant attire, but her posture was different. The slight, deferential stoop was gone. She stood straight, her eyes clear and sharp, meeting Damien's gaze with a look of professional respect. "Amelia," Eleanor began, confused. "Is everything all right?" "Amelia is not her real name," Damien said quietly. "This is Cassandra Thorne. She's a former MI6 field agent and the head of my private security division." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. She looked from Damien to the woman she knew as Amelia, the woman who had brought her tea and listened to her fears. The whole world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every shared confidence, every moment of vulnerability flashed through her mind, now tainted with the chilling realization that it had all been a report. "You," Eleanor's voice was a choked whisper, "you spied on me. You put a spy in my life." The hurt was sharper than anything she had felt before, a betrayal that cut deeper than any imagined affair. "I put a guardian in your life," Damien countered, his voice firm but pained. "The most capable one I could find. Her primary directive was not to report on you, but to protect you. To be there if one of Rossi's people ever got close. To be a friend, yes, but a friend who could neutralize a threat in under 3 seconds." Cassandra, Amelia, finally spoke, her voice crisp and devoid of the gentle warmth Eleanor was used to. "Mrs. Vance, I never lied about my admiration for you, and the advice I gave was genuine. But my first priority was always your safety. When you felt dizzy at the gallery 2 months ago, I was the one who happened to be there to catch you and call the driver. The lost tourist who asked you for directions, getting a little too close. I was prepared to break his arm. He was one of Rossi's men, testing your security." Eleanor felt sick. She stood up, backing away from them both. "I confided in you. I told you things, private things about my marriage, about how I felt. And not a single word of it was ever reported to me," Damien stated, his eyes locked on hers, pleading with her to believe him. "I swear on our son's life, Cassandra's reports were purely logistical. Your location, your schedule, any potential threats. That was all. Your heart, your feelings. Those were yours. I knew I was hurting you, Eleanor. I didn't need a report to tell me that. I saw it in your eyes every day." He took a step toward her. "I hated doing it, but I would do it again. I would let you hate me for a year, for a lifetime, if it meant keeping you and our child safe. The cage you felt you were in, it was real. But the bars were there to keep the monsters out, not to keep you in." He turned back to the monitor. "There's one last thing you need to see, so you understand why I did all this." He switched the input to a live news feed. Marco Rossi stood at a podium, his face haggard, trying to do damage control. It was pathetic. Then a reporter in the front row, a woman Eleanor didn't recognize, stood up. "Mr. Rossi, putting aside the allegations of corporate espionage, can you comment on the sealed court documents from your first divorce, specifically the accusations that you paid a doctor to have your wife institutionalized when she threatened to expose your illegal activities?" Marco froze. The color vanished from his face. It was a vicious, perfectly aimed blow that had nothing to do with business. It was character assassination of the highest order. "That's a lie. An outrageous—" he stammered, but his eyes darted around wildly. The reporters descended like sharks, shouting questions. His carefully constructed press conference collapsed into a humiliating public spectacle. "That reporter works for a media outlet I own," Damien said, his voice cold as ice. "I've had that information for 5 years. I was never going to use it. But he allowed his daughter to attack my pregnant wife. He brought family into it. So I ended it with family." He turned off the monitor, plunging the room into a heavy silence. The karma was absolute, a public crucifixion born of Marco's own hubris. Eleanor looked at Damien, this brilliant, terrifying man who had built a fortress of secrets around her. She looked at the woman she had thought was her friend, She was adrift in a sea of revelations. "Leave me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Both of you. Just leave me alone." They left without a word. Eleanor sank into the leather chair, the silence of the office pressing in on her. She had been a pawn, a satellite, a treasure to be protected. But she had never been a partner. The pain of that truth was the deepest wound of all. That night, she was awoken by a noise. She slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hall to the nursery. The door was ajar, and a soft light spilled into the hallway. She peeked inside. Damien was there. He had a toolbox open on the floor and was painstakingly assembling the crib himself. The instructions were spread out, and he was frowning in concentration, trying to fit a small wooden peg into a hole. He looked utterly out of place, this man who commanded boardrooms and dismantled empires, now struggling with an Allen key. She watched him for a long time, unseen. He wasn't doing it for show. He was doing it because it needed to be done, because he was trying, in his own way, to build their future with his own two hands. Not a fortress, a home. She walked into the room. He looked up, startled, a faint blush creeping up his neck. "I thought the decorators were handling this," she said softly. "I sent them home," he replied, not meeting her eye. "I wanted to do it." He finally looked at her, his expression raw with vulnerability. "I've controlled everything, Eleanor, manipulated every outcome, and in doing so, I almost lost the only thing that matters. I can't build back your trust with a strategy. I can only do it with my own two hands, one piece at a time." Eleanor walked over and sat on the floor beside him, taking the instructions. She pointed to a diagram. "I think," she said, her voice still fragile, "that this piece goes here." He looked at the diagram, then at the crib, and then at her. A genuine, unguarded smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features. In the quiet, half-finished nursery, surrounded by paint cans and unassembled furniture, they began to put the pieces of their life back together. The day their son was born was a blur of controlled panic and overwhelming love. Damien never left her side. He held her hand. He breathed with her. He was her anchor. And when Arthur Vance finally entered the world with a healthy, indignant cry, the look on Damien's face was one of such pure, unadulterated joy that Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty, that they had found their way back. A year later, the world had settled. The name Rossi was a footnote in financial history, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Marco was a recluse, his fortune gone, his reputation incinerated. Isabella had taken a plea deal, her sentence reduced in exchange for testifying against her father's more unsavory business partners. Her arrogance had been her undoing in court, her tearless, defiant testimony painting her not as a pawn, but as a willing conspirator, ensuring she would serve her time without a shred of public sympathy. Life in the Vance mansion had transformed. The silence was no longer heavy with suspicion, but filled with the gurgles and happy shrieks of a baby discovering his own voice. Arthur was the sun around which their new world turned. One afternoon, Eleanor walked into Damien's home office. He was standing before a massive glass whiteboard covered in complex charts and arrows connecting various corporate entities. Two of his top executives stood with him, looking grim. "The Le Marchal acquisition is turning sour," one of them, a man named Peters, was saying. "Their CEO, Antoine Le Marchal, he's playing hardball. He's sentimental about the company his grandfather built. He's refusing our offer, even though it's more than fair. He says Vance Industries is a soulless machine that will gut his family's legacy." "Then we initiate a hostile takeover," Damien said, his voice flat and cold. "Crush him. Buy up a controlling interest through shell companies and force him out. Legacy doesn't pay the bills." Eleanor listened from the doorway, holding a sleeping Arthur in a carrier strapped to her chest. The old Damien was there, the ruthless strategist. But she saw something else now. She saw the lines of the problem, not just the numbers. "You're wrong," she said quietly. The three men turned, surprised. The executives looked uncomfortable, but Damien's expression was one of pure, unguarded curiosity. He motioned for her to come closer. "Explain," he said, his tone an invitation, not a challenge. She walked to the board, the scent of dry erase markers sharp in the air. You're treating this like the Rossi problem, a war to be won, but Le Marchal isn't Marco Rossi. He isn't a viper. He's a sheepdog protecting his flock. She looked at the dossier on his desk, which she had read earlier. His company has one of the highest employee retention rates in the industry. He personally pays for a scholarship fund for his workers' children. He's not motivated by money, he's motivated by pride and by love for his people. A hostile takeover will prove him right. You'll become the soulless machine he already thinks you are. Peters scoffed. With all due respect, Mrs. Vance, this is business. Everything is personal, Mr. Peters, Eleanor replied, her voice calm and firm. She turned to Damien. Don't send in the sharks. Send a shepherd. Go to him yourself. Not as Damien Vance, CEO, but as a man who understands legacy. Tell him about your own grandfather, who started this company with a $2,000 loan. Don't offer to buy his company. Offer to partner with it. Create a new division, Le Marchal by Vance, and make him its president. Give him autonomy. Give him a budget to expand his scholarship fund. You won't just be buying his company, you'll be buying his loyalty. And the loyalty of every employee who loves him. That's a legacy he can be proud of, and an asset you can't put a price on. The office was silent. The two executives stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning respect. Damien looked from Eleanor to the whiteboard, and she could see the gears turning in his brilliant mind. He was seeing the chessboard in a whole new light, not as a field of battle, but as a garden to be cultivated. He slowly picked up an eraser and wiped a section of the board clean. The aggressive arrows and hostile strategies disappeared. In the empty space, he wrote 2 words: the Vance-Le Marchal Partnership. He turned to his executives. You heard her. Cancel the takeover plans. Get me a meeting with Antoine Le Marchal, my office, tomorrow. They nodded, speechless, and left the room. Damien turned to Eleanor, a slow smile spreading across his face. He gently touched Arthur's sleeping head, then cupped Eleanor's cheek. Soulless machine, am I? He murmured, a teasing light in his stormy eyes. Sometimes, she admitted, smiling back, you just need someone to remind you where the soul is. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, the same proximity as that fateful night at the gala. But the voice was different. The chilling whisper that had promised destruction was gone, replaced by a warmth that seeped into her very soul. I once thought my job was to protect you from the world, he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. I was wrong. My job is to build a world that is worthy of you. With you. He kissed her temple, then their son's forehead. You are not my satellite, Eleanor. You are my gravity, you and Arthur. You are the center of my entire universe.